Dr. Sterling, the hospital's proud golden boy, actually placed a 500 wager that the new middle-aged nurse wouldn't make it a week at St. Jude's Elite Trauma Center. She moved too slowly, checked the charts too obsessively, and didn't fit the sleek, high-tech image of modern medicine. But the laughter died the night the doors burst open and a critical Navy SEAL unit was wheeled in, because the dying commander didn't look at the chief of surgery. He looked at the trembling new nurse who fought through the anesthesia and raised a shaking hand to his brow. What happened next didn't just silence the room. It ended careers. The fluorescent lights of St. Jude's Military Medical Center in Virginia hummed with an aggressive brightness, illuminating the sleek stainless steel surfaces of what was arguably the best trauma unit on the East Coast. It was a place for the best of the best. The doctors here weren't just physicians, they were gods in white coats, groomed for greatness and boasting degrees from Harvard and Johns Hopkins. And then there was Sarah. Sarah Miller stood by the supply cart in Trauma Bay 4, slowly restocking IV bags. She was 52 years old, with graying hair pulled back into a severe, unfashionable bun. Her scrubs were a size too big, hiding a frame that looked tired. She didn't move with the frantic, caffeinated energy of the younger nurses who sprinted down the halls in their tight fig scrubs. Sarah moved with a deliberate, plotting pace that drove the residents insane. "Check the expiration dates again, Sarah," Dr. Preston Sterling called out from the nurse's station, not bothering to look up from his tablet. He was 32, handsome in a jagged, sharp way, and the son of a senator. He was the chief resident, and he made sure everyone knew it. "I checked them 10 minutes ago, doctor," Sarah said, her voice raspy, like she had spent too many years shouting over noise. "We'll check them again." Sterling smirked, winking at the nurse beside him, a young woman named Brittany who spent more time fixing her eyeliner than checking vitals. "We can't have our patients dying because Grandma forgot to read the label," Sterling said loudly, ensuring the entire floor could hear. "Dementia is a silent killer."
"You know," Brittany giggled, covering her mouth. "You're terrible, Dr. Sterling. I'm just cautious," Sterling said.
"HR keeps sending us these charity cases. I mean, look at her hands, they shake." It was true. Sarah's hands had a faint rhythmic tremor, subtle, but to a surgeon like Sterling it was a glaring neon sign of incompetence. Sarah didn't respond, she just gripped the saline bag tighter, her knuckles turning white, and continued her work. She had only been at St. Jude's for 3 weeks. In that time she had been assigned the worst shifts, the messiest cleanups, and the most menial tasks. They treated her like a glorified maid who happened to have an RN license. "I heard she used to work at a rural clinic in Nebraska." Another resident, Dr. Cole, whispered loudly. "Probably put band-aids on scraped knees for 30 years now. She thinks she can handle Tier 1 trauma care. She won't last." Sterling finally stood up, smoothing his pristine white coat. "I give it 2 more days. One real emergency, one massive hemorrhage, and she'll faint. Then we can get her out of here and get someone who actually belongs in the 21st century." Sarah finished stocking the cart and walked past them, eyes fixed on the floor. She wasn't deaf. She heard every word. The insults burned, but they were nothing compared to the phantom heat she felt on her skin, sometimes the heat of burning oil and desert sand. She went to the break room, poured herself a cup of stale coffee, and sat alone, rubbing her right knee, which throbbed when it rained. "Just keep your head down, Sarah," she told herself. "You need this pension. You need the quiet." But the quiet was about to be shattered. The klaxon didn't just ring, it screamed. It was the specific 2-tone alarm that signaled a mass casualty event involving active duty personnel, code black. ETA 3 minutes. Surgical teams 1 through 4 to the bay. This is not a drill. The atmosphere in the hospital shifted instantly. The casual mockery vanished, replaced by frantic, controlled chaos. "All right, people, let's move," Sterling barked, shifting into command mode. "We have incoming from Andrews Air Force Base. Special operations transport. That means high-value targets and heavy trauma. Brittany, get the blood bank on the line. Cole, prep Bay 1. Sarah, you stay out of the way. Go manage the waiting room or something. I don't want you tripping over the cords when the real work starts." "I'm trauma certified," Sarah said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I don't care what piece of paper you have," Sterling snapped. "This is a SEAL team extraction gone wrong. High-velocity rounds, shrapnel, potential blast injuries. This isn't a flu shot clinic. Stay out of the way." He didn't wait for an answer. He spun around and rushed toward the ambulance bay doors. Sarah stood there for a second, the old instinct flaring up in her chest, the urge to run toward the fire, but she swallowed it down. She stepped back against the wall near the scrubbed sinks, making herself invisible. The double doors flew open with a violent crash. The noise was deafening. Paramedics were shouting vitals, gurneys were rattling, and the metallic smell of fresh blood filled the air instantly. Male 30s, multiple GSWs to the chest wall, male 20s blast amputation of the left leg, and then the center of the chaos, a gurney surrounded by 4 MPs and 2 frantic flight medics. Make a whole move, a medic screamed. We have the HVT, high-value target. Commander Jack Reynolds. He took a sniper round to the upper thoracic cavity and shrapnel to the neck. BP is 70/40 and dropping. Sterling was on him instantly. Get him to Bay 1. I want a thoracotomy tray open now. Type and cross-match for 6 units. The man on the gurney was a mountain of a human being, even pale from blood loss. Commander Reynolds looked like he was carved from granite. His tactical vest had been cut away, revealing a torso matted with blood and guts. His eyes were fluttering, rolling back into his head. Sarah watched from the periphery. She saw the way the blood was pulsing from the neck wound, dark red venous. But the chest wound was the problem. She took a half step forward and noticed something the frantic residents were missing. The team swarmed the commander. Doctor. Sterling was shouting orders. Trining was fighting the tube. Push 100 mmgs of succinylmethonium choline. Hold him down. The commander was thrashing, even half dead. His survival instinct was violent. He grabbed Dr. Cole's wrist with a bloody hand, his grip like a vice. Restrain him? Sterling yelled. He can't breathe. You idiot. Sarah whispered to herself, watching the monitor. The oxygen saturation wasn't coming up even with the bag valve mask. His heart rate was climbing into tachycardia, but his blood pressure was narrowing. Sterling was fixated on the neck wound. It's a jugular nick clamp. We need to stop the bleeding before we intubate. Doctor, Sarah said, without meaning to speak, but the words forced themselves out. Sterling ignored her. Clamp it. Can someone get this guy's arm down, Dr. Sterling? Sarah shouted, stepping away from the wall. The room went silent for a microsecond. Sterling whipped his head around, his face mask splattered with a speck of blood. Get her out of here, security. He has a tension pneumothorax, Sarah said, her voice dropping to a low, commanding register that didn't match the grandma persona they knew. Look at the tracheal deviation. It's shifting left. You're trying to intubate a collapsed lung. You're going to kill him in 30 seconds. Dr. Sterling stared at her, his eyes wide with fury. Who do you think you are? I am the attending trauma surgeon here. You are a nurse who can barely restock a cart. Get out. Look at his neck, Sarah pointed. Not at the bleeding wound, but at the throat structure itself. Under the harsh lights, barely visible beneath the grime of war and blood, the commander's windpipe is indeed pushed slightly to the left. His chest on the right side isn't moving. Dr. Cole stammered, looking at the patient. Preston, look, no breath sounds on the right, distended neck veins. Sterling hesitated. In trauma medicine, hesitation is death. His ego was wrestling with the visual evidence. If he listened to the janitor, he looked weak. If he didn't, the patient died. It's just swelling from the shrapnel. Sterling doubled down, pride winning over logic. Proceed with incubation. If we don't secure the airway, he dies anyway. Push the drugs. Sarah moved. She didn't run like a young nurse. She moved with efficient, explosive power. She bypassed the scrub line, grabbing a 4-through gauge angel cath needle from the open tray. Security, stop her! Sterling screamed. But Sarah was already at the bedside. She didn't ask for permission, didn't check the chart, and placed her left hand on the commander's chest, feeling for the second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. A motion she had performed 1,000 times in the back of Black Hawks and in dusty tents under mortar fire. Don't you touch him. Sterling lunged at her. Sarah dropped her shoulder, checking Sterling with a rigid elbow that sent the young doctor stumbling back into a tray of instruments. It wasn't a push. It was a tactical block. In the same motion, she drove the needle into the commander's chest. A hiss filled the room. The trapped air escaped with a violent rush, releasing the pressure that was crushing the commander's heart and good lung. Immediately, the monitor changed. The frantic beeping slowed. The oxygen saturation numbers began to tick up 80, 85, 90. Commander Reynolds gasped a massive, ragged intake of air. His eyes snapped open. He was no longer thrashing in panic. He was breathing. The room froze. Dr. Sterling was picking himself up off the floor, his face a mask of shock and rage. The other nurses stared at Sarah as if she had grown a second head. Sarah didn't look at them. Her hand was still on the commander's chest, stabilizing the needle. She looked down at the patient, and that was when the commander saw her. His vision was blurry, swimming with drugs and pain. He saw the white ceiling, the blinding lights, and the faces of strangers. Then he locked eyes with the woman holding the needle in his chest. He blinked, squinting to focus through the haze. Sarah's face was calm. "Breathe, Commander.
I've got you.
You're at St. Jude's. You're safe."
Reynolds's lips moved.
He was trying to speak, but the trauma was too great. He lifted his right hand, the one that had been gripping Dr. Cole, and reached towards Sarah. Dr. Sterling stormed back to the table. "You are finished," he hissed at Sarah, his voice trembling with humiliation. "You assaulted a doctor. You performed an unauthorized procedure. I will have your license revoked before the sun comes up. Get away from my patient." "Wait," Dr. Cole said softly. "Look." Commander Reynolds wasn't pushing Sarah away. His bloodied hand had found the fabric of her scrub top. He wasn't grabbing her in aggression. He was gripping her sleeve like a lifeline. He pulled her closer, his eyes intense, searching her face. He whispered one word, choked and raspy, but audible enough for the surgical team to hear Angel. Sarah's stoic mask cracked for just a fraction of a second. Her eyes softened. "I'm here, Jack. I'm here." Sterling looked between them, confused and furious.
What is going on?
"Do you know this woman?" Commander Reynolds didn't look at Sterling. He didn't look at the expensive equipment. He kept his eyes on Sarah. With a monumental effort, he released her scrub top and tried to shift his body, winced in agony, and forced his arm up. Slowly, shakily, the commander of the Navy SEALs brought his hand to his brow and saluted her. It wasn't a casual wave, it was a formal, lingering salute of absolute respect. Sarah didn't salute back. She was a nurse now, not a soldier. She simply nodded a single sharp nod of acknowledgement. "At ease? Commander, let us work," she said. Reynolds dropped his hand, his body finally relaxing as the anesthesia took him under, but a faint smile lingered on his lips. Sterling stood there, his mouth gaping. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. "What?" Sterling whispered. "What the hell just happened?" Sarah turned to him. The shaky, timid grandma was gone. In her place stood someone cold, hard, and infinitely more dangerous than the doctor. "He's stable," Sarah said, her voice flat. "Do your job, doctor. Fix the neck. I'll prep the chest tube. And if you shout at me again while a patient is dying, I'll break your finger." 2 hours later, the adrenaline had faded, replaced by the sterile, freezing air of the hospital administration wing. Sarah sat in a plush leather chair that felt too soft, too expensive. Across the mahogany table sat Mr. Henderson, the hospital administrator, Mrs. Galloway, the director of nursing, and Dr. Sterling. Sterling had cleaned up. He had changed out of his blood-stained scrubs into a crisp navy blue suit. He looked like the picture of medical authority. Sarah, by contrast, was still in her soiled scrubs, with a smear of Commander Reynolds's blood on her sleeve that had dried to a rust color. She hadn't been allowed to change. They escorted her straight from the OR to this room like a criminal. Sterling said, leaning back, tapping a gold pen against the table. She not only insubordinately interrupted a critical procedure, but she also physically assaulted an attending physician. "I have a bruise on my chest, Mr. Henderson." Mr. Henderson, a man who cared more about liability insurance than patient care, looked over his glasses at Sarah. "Miller, is this true? Did you strike Dr. Sterling?" "I blocked him," Sarah said, her voice quiet. She was looking at her hands, those shaking hands that had been rock steady when it mattered. He was about to interfere with a life-saving procedure. "I neutralized the threat to the patient." "Neutralize the threat?" Sterling scoffed, a cruel laugh escaping him. "Listen to her. She thinks she's in an action movie. You're a nurse, Sarah, a geriatric nurse at that. You are not a surgeon. You are not a trauma specialist. You stuck a needle into the chest of a high-value military asset without authorization. If I hadn't stepped in to fix the damage, Commander Reynolds would be dead." Her eyes were tired. Dark circles were carved deep beneath them. "The commander is stable, isn't he? His old stats are 99%, his lung reinflated. The chest tube is draining perfectly. That is due to my team's follow-up," Sterling lied smoothly. "We had to clean up your mess. You got lucky, Sarah." "Blind luck." "But luck isn't a medical strategy. You are a liability. Imagine if you had punctured his heart. The lawsuit would bankrupt this hospital." Mrs. Galloway, the director of nursing, looked pained. She knew Sarah was a hard worker, but she was terrified of Sterling. "Sarah, you have to understand the protocol. You went outside your scope of practice. You can't just stab patients." "He was dying," Sarah said, her voice hardening. "He had a tension pneumothorax, doctor. Sterling was treating a neck wound while the patient suffocated. Protocol doesn't matter when the patient is turning blue." Mr. Henderson slammed a file shut. Ms. Miller, Dr. Sterling is the chief resident. His judgment is the final word in that trauma bay. By overriding him, you undermine the hierarchy of this institution. Henderson slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a termination notice, effective immediately. Your employment at St. Jude's is terminated for cause. We will be reporting this incident to the State Nursing Board. You will likely lose your license, Miss Miller. Security will escort you to your locker to collect your personal effects. Sterling smirked, a subtle victorious curl of his lip. He had won. He had erased the witness to his incompetence. Sarah stared at the paper. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She had been fired from better places than this. She had been fired upon by snipers in the Hindu Kush. A piece of paper from a bureaucrat in a suit didn't scare her. Fine, Sarah whispered. She stood up. Her knee popped a loud crack in the silent room. She winced, grabbed the edge of the table, and straightened her back. I have one question, she said, looking directly at Sterling. Make it quick. Sterling checked his Rolex. When you go check on him, when you look Commander Reynolds in the eye, Sarah, are you going to tell him that you were the one who saved him? Are you going to steal that valor, doctor? Sterling's face flushed red. Get out. Sarah turned and walked to the door. She didn't look back. She walked with that same slow, plotting limp that they had all mocked. But as she left the office, the air in the room felt lighter, as if a heavy, dangerous presence had just departed. Good riddance, Sterling muttered. Now I have to go deal with the family. Apparently, Reynolds comes from a military dynasty. I need to make sure they know their son was in the best hands. The recovery ICU at St. Jude's was quiet, filled only with the rhythmic whooshing of ventilators and the soft beeping of cardiac monitors. Commander Jack Reynolds lay in bed propped up on pillows. He was groggy, his chest wrapped in thick bandages, a tube snaking out from his ribs. But he was alive. His mind was still piecing together the fragments of the last few hours, the ambush, the helicopter ride, the feeling of drowning in his own blood. And then the angel. He remembered her face. It was older, lined with the kind of wrinkles you only get from squinting into the sun for years. He remembered the gray hair, the voice, breathe, Commander. Nurse Reynolds rasped, his voice like gravel. A young Nurse Brittany rushed to his side. Commander Reynolds, you're awake. Dr. Sterling said you might be out for another hour. Can I get you some ice chips? Where is she? Reynolds asked, ignoring the offer. Who, sir? The woman? Brittany asked. The one with the gray hair. The one who put the needle in. Brittany's face fell. She looked uncomfortable. Oh, you mean Sarah, the older nurse? Sarah. Reynolds tested the name. It sounded right. Get her. I need to speak to her. Brittany bit her lip. I'm sorry, Commander. Sarah isn't here anymore. There was an incident. She was escorted off the premises about 20 minutes ago. Reynolds' eyes narrowed. The pain medication was making him float, but the rage acted as an anchor, escorted off. She wasn't supposed to do what she did, Brittany whispered, leaning in as if sharing gossip. Dr. Sterling fired her. She broke protocol. Reynolds tried to sit up, causing the monitors to blare a warning. She saved my life. That protocol was killing me. Sir, please lay back. Brittany panicked. I'll get Dr. Sterling. At that moment the double doors to the ICU swung open. It wasn't Dr. Sterling. It was a wall of green uniforms. 2 military police officers stepped in first, scanning the room with practiced intensity. Then came a colonel holding a briefcase. Finally, walking with a cane but moving with the energy of a freight train, came General Thomas Mitchell, a legend, 4 stars, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the kind of man whose presence made the air pressure change. Dr. Sterling came running down the hall, adjusting his tie, a wide sycophantic smile plastered on his face. He had been waiting for the Veeps, hoping to smooth his way into a military consultancy contract. General Mitchell, Sterling beamed, extending a hand. I'm Dr. Preston Sterling, Chief Resident. It is an honor. I'm happy to report that Commander Reynolds is stable. General Mitchell walked right past Sterling's outstretched hand, as if the doctor didn't exist. He walked straight to bed. Jack, the general said, his voice gruff but warm. You look like hell, son. Feel like it. Sir, Reynolds grunted, but I'm breathing, so I hear. Mitchell nodded. He looked at the monitors, then turned slowly to face the room. The pleasant demeanor vanished. The general looked at Sterling, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Who is the attending in charge? I am. Sterling stepped forward, his smile faltering slightly. Dr. Sterling, I performed the stabilization. The general looked him up and down with open skepticism. My report from the field medic said Reynolds had a tension pneumothorax upon arrival. They said he was minutes from death. You decompressed him, the general said. It was a team effort. Sterling said, puffing out his chest. I directed the procedure. We had some interference from a staff member, but I managed the situation. Interference. Reynolds growled from the bed. Sir, he fired her. He fired the medic who saved me. General Mitchell's eyes snapped to Reynolds. The medic. You mean the woman?
Yes, sir.
Sarah, she knew the drill. She moved like one of us. This clown, Reynolds gestured weakly at Sterling, was staring at my neck while my lungs were collapsing. She pushed him aside. The general turned back to Sterling. His face was unreadable, which was terrifying. You fired the woman who performed the needle decompression. She was a nurse. Sterling defended himself, his voice rising. She was an old, incompetent nurse with shaky hands. She assaulted me. She had no right to touch a patient of this caliber. Shaky hands, the general repeated softly, looking at the colonel beside him. Colonel, pull the file. The colonel opened the briefcase and pulled out a thick black folder. It wasn't a hospital personnel file. It was a classified Department of Defense dossier. Dr. Sterling, General Mitchell said, his voice dangerously calm.
Do you know who Sarah Miller is?
She's a nobody. Sterling spat. A transfer from Nebraska. Sarah Miller. The general began reading from the file without looking at it. Is the retired alias of Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Dusty Miller. She served 3 tours in Iraq and 4 in Afghanistan as the lead trauma specialist for the 75th Ranger Regiment and later JC. She didn't work in a clinic, doctor. She worked in the back of Black Hawks while taking AK-47 fire. The room went deathly silent. Brittany gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Sterling's face went pale. She has shaky hands. The general continued, his voice rising. Because she sustained nerve damage in Fallujah while holding pressure on a soldier's femoral artery for 6 hours after their convoy was hit by an IED. She refused evacuation until her men were safe. The general took a step closer to Sterling, looming over him. She is a recipient of the Distinguished Service Cross and the Silver Star. She is widely regarded in the special operations community as the ghost medic because she brings men back from the dead. Sterling opened his mouth, but no sound came out. And you? The general poked a finger into Sterling's expensive suit, right where the bruise from Sarah's elbow was forming. You fired her for incompetence. I didn't know, Sterling stammered. She was just stocking carts. She looked like she was tired of war. Reynolds said from the bed. She just wanted peace. And you treated her like garbage. General Mitchell turned to the colonel. Find her now, sir. The colonel tapped his earpiece. I have perimeter security. They say a woman matching her description just boarded the catastrophic bus line heading downtown. She's leaving. Get the detail. Mitchell barked. We are not letting her leave like this. The general turned back to Sterling. Doctor, I suggest you start updating your resume. Because if I find out you insulted a war hero and jeopardized my commander's life for your ego, I will ensure you never practice medicine in this country again. I'll have your license pulled so fast your head will spin. But she assaulted me, Sterling cried, desperate. Son. The general smiled, and it was a wolf smile. If Sarah Miller wanted to hurt you, you wouldn't be standing here complaining. You'd be in the morgue. The general spun on his heel. Let's move. We have a hero to 2 city bus was a rattling cage of misery, smelling of wet wool, diesel fumes, and hopelessness. Outside, the Virginia sky opened up, unleashing a torrent of freezing rain that hammered against the roof like shrapnel. Sarah Miller sat in the very last row, squeezed into the corner seat. The vibration of the engine traveled up through the floor, rattling her teeth, but she barely felt it. She was numb. In her lap, she clutched a pathetic, soggy cardboard box. The standard issue "You're fired" box. Inside rested the sum total of her time at St. Jude's Medical Center. A cracked coffee mug that read, "World's okayest nurse." A stethoscope she had bought with her own money, because the hospital-issued ones were garbage, and a small, dying, succulent plant. She stared out the window, watching the grey cityscape of Arlington blur into streaks of concrete and regret. It's over, she told herself. The thought wasn't angry, it was just a heavy, suffocating fact. For 10 years Sarah had lived as a ghost. She had buried Dusty, the legend, the operator, the woman who had performed surgery in the back of burning Humvees. Deep inside this shell of a middle-aged, invisible woman, she had traded the adrenaline of combat for the safety of anonymity. She had done it to survive, to quiet the nightmares. She thought that if she kept her head down, If she let people like Dr. Sterling mock her walk and her age, she could live a peaceful life. But the warrior in her hadn't died, it was just sleeping, and today it had woken up just long enough to save a life and ruin hers. He's going to press charges, she whispered to the condensation on the glass. She could already see the police report assault on a physician practicing medicine without a license. Sterling would ruin her. She would lose her nursing certification, her pension, and end up greeting customers at a grocery store. No one would ever know that the nice old lady scanning their apples once held the rank of lieutenant colonel. The driver's voice crackled over the static intercom. Next stop, 4th and Main. Transfer to the blue line. Sarah sighed, shifting her weight. Her bad knee, the one shattered by a mortar blast in Kandahar, throbbed in sync with the windshield wipers. Thump, 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 thump. She closed her eyes, preparing for the lonely walk to her apartment. Screech. The bus didn't just stop, it lurched violently. Tires locked up on the wet asphalt. Passengers were thrown forward against the seats in front of them. Someone screamed. A bag of groceries spilled in the aisle, sending oranges rolling like billiard balls. What the hell? The driver yelled, slamming his hand on the horn. Are you crazy? Sarah grabbed the rail to steady herself, her heart hammering against her ribs. She looked out the rear window. Her stomach dropped. The street behind them was blocked. 2 black SUVs, massive and imposing, had pulled sideways across the lanes, cutting off traffic. Their grille lights were flashing red and blue, blindingly bright in the gloom. She looked forward. 3 more SUVs had boxed the bus in from the front, and beyond them she saw the distinct olive-drab paint of military Humvees. It's a raid, a teenager in the middle row whispered, holding up his phone to record. Dude, it's a full-on raid. Sarah sank lower in her seat, pulling her coat collar up. Sterling called the police. She thought, panic finally piercing her numbness. But this isn't police. This is federal. The bus driver opened the pneumatic doors, his hands raised high in the air. I didn't do anything. Don't shoot. I'm just driving the route. Through the rain-streaked window, Sarah saw figures moving. They didn't move like city cops. They moved with the terrifying fluid precision of apex predators. They wore rain ponchos over tactical gear, drop-leg holsters, and earpieces. MP military police. Please remain seated. This vehicle is under federal interdiction. The bus fell deathly silent. The only sound was the rain drumming on the roof and the heavy breathing of terrified passengers. Sarah's hands shook, not from age, but from the adrenaline dump she hadn't felt since Fallujah. She looked at her hands, clutching that stupid box of junk. She prepared to be handcuffed, prepared for the humiliation of being dragged off the bus in front of strangers. 2 MPs boarded the bus. They were giants filling the narrow entryway. They didn't look at the driver. They scanned the passengers row by row, their eyes hidden behind dark ballistic glasses despite the gloom. Clear, the first MP said into his radio. Target is in the rear. They stepped aside, and then the sound of a cane tapping against the metal steps echoed through the silence. Clack, clack, clack. A man ascended into the bus. He wasn't wearing tactical gear, he was wearing a dress uniform, immaculate and dry, protected by an umbrella held by an aide outside. 4 silver stars gleamed on his shoulders. The ribbons on his chest were a colorful mosaic of American history. Wars fought, blood spilled, victories won. General Thomas Mitchell, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The passengers gasped. Even civilians knew who this man was. He was the face of the military on the nightly news. General Mitchell walked down the narrow aisle of the dirty city bus. He walked past the teenager filming with a phone, past the spilled oranges. He looked at no one, his eyes were fixed on the very last row. Sarah didn't stand up, she couldn't. She felt small, dirty, and ashamed. She looked down at her cracked mug. The general stopped in front of her. He stood there for a long moment, the silence stretching until it was painful. You're a hard woman to track down, Dusty, Mitchell said softly. His voice wasn't the booming command voice he used on TV. It was warm, laced with an old, familiar pain. Sarah looked up, tears finally spilling over her lashes. Hello, Tom. You look like hell, Sarah, he said, a small sad smile touching his lip. I feel like it, she whispered. I messed up, Tom. I assaulted a civilian doctor. I broke protocol. I just wanted to save him. I know, Mitchell said. He looked at the cardboard box, then at her scrubs stained with the blood of Commander Reynolds. His expression hardened, shifting from an old friend to a vengeful general. They fired you. Yes, for saving the life of a Navy SEAL commander. For embarrassing a rich kid with a scalpel. Sarah corrected him, her voice trembling. Mitchell's jaw tightened. Well, that rich kid is about to have a very bad day. The general reached out, not to shake her hand, but to take the cardboard box from her lap. Sir, you don't have to carry that, Sarah protested weakly.
It's trash! It's not trash!
Mitchell said firmly, tucking the box under his arm like it was classified intelligence. It's the evidence of their stupidity. And you are not taking the bus home.
Colonel, he extended his free hand.
Come on, we have a mission. A mission.
Sarah hesitated.
Tom, I'm retired. I'm fired. I'm nobody.
You are Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Miller, Mitchell said, his voice rising so every passenger on the bus could hear him. You are the ghost medic of the 75th Rangers. You are the reason Jack Reynolds is breathing right now. And we do not leave our heroes rotting on public transit in the rain. Sarah stared at his hand. It was a lifeline. It was an invitation back to the world she had left behind, the world of honor, of duty, of respect. Slowly she reached out. Her rough, calloused hand gripped his. As she stood up, her bad knee popped, but she didn't wince. She straightened her back. She pulled her shoulders back. The slump of the tired old nurse evaporated, replaced by the posture of an officer. Mitchell turned and led her down the aisle. As they passed the passengers, the mood shifted. The fear was gone, replaced by awe. The teenager with the phone lowered it out of respect. An old man in the front row wearing a faded Vietnam veteran hat stood up as they passed. He didn't say a word. He just nodded. They stepped off the bus and into the freezing rain, but Sarah didn't feel the cold. A dozen soldiers were waiting outside, standing at rigid attention by the convoy. As Sarah's boot hit the pavement, the colonel in charge shouted,
Present arms.
12 rifles snapped up. 12 hands rose in perfect unison to their brows. They weren't saluting the general. They were looking straight at Sarah. Sarah stopped. She felt the breath catch in her throat. She looked at Mitchell. For me, she whispered. For the angel of the sandbox, Mitchell nodded. He gestured to the open door of the lead armored SUV. Your chariot awaits. Dusty, we're going back to St. Jude's, why? Sarah asked, wiping the rain and tears from her face. Mitchell's eyes glittered with a dangerous, righteous light. Because Commander Reynolds is awake, and because I want to see the look on Dr. Sterling's face when I walk back in there with you. Sarah climbed into the leather seat of the SUV. The warmth enveloped her. As the door closed, shutting out the rain and the noise of the city, she realized something. She wasn't running anymore. Driver, Mitchell ordered from the seat beside her. Lights and sirens. I want them to hear the thunder coming. The engine roared to life. The convoy peeled away from the bus tires, screaming on the wet pavement, racing back toward the hospital to deliver the ultimate dose of karma. The main lobby of St. Jude's Medical Center was a cathedral of glass and steel, usually a place of hushed whispers and hurried footsteps. But today the atmosphere was brittle with tension. It felt less like a hospital and more like a courtroom waiting for a verdict. Mr. Henderson, the hospital administrator, paced back and forth near the reception desk. He was a small man who sweated easily, and right now his forehead was glistening. He checked his watch for the 10th time in a minute. They're late, Henderson muttered, wiping his brow with a handkerchief. The general said 1400 hours. It's 1402. Why are they late? Dr. Preston Sterling stood beside him, leaning against the marble pillar with practiced nonchalance. He had retied his tie 3 times. He had checked his reflection in the glass doors. To the casual observer, he looked confident, the very picture of a handsome, wealthy chief resident, but his eyes were darting nervously. Relax, Henderson, Sterling said, though his voice was a little too high. It's a power move. The military loves to make civilians wait. Look, General Mitchell is probably just coming to smooth things over. He needs us. St. Jude's handles 40% of the DOD's specialized reconstructive surgeries in this state. He's not going to jeopardize that contract over some fired nurse. I hope you're right, Preston. Because if you're wrong and we lose the Tier 1 funding, the board of directors will have my head on a platter. Henderson hissed, I'm always right. Sterling scoffed, adjusting his cuffs. I saved that, Commander. The nurse panicked. That's the narrative, stick to it. Suddenly the conversation died. The receptionist stopped typing. The visitors in the waiting area looked up from their magazines. Even the air conditioning seemed to hold its breath. Through the rain-slicked glass of the automatic revolving doors, blue and red lights washed over the lobby walls. It wasn't just one car, it was a procession. A fleet of black government SUVs pulled up to the curb, flanked by military police motorcycles. The vehicle stopped with aggressive precision. Doors flew open in unison. Here we go, Sterling whispered, straightening his spine. Showtime. Soldiers in full-dress uniforms spilled out of the vehicles, forming a corridor from the curb to the doors. They stood like statues, rain bouncing off their covers, rifles at their sides. Then General Thomas Mitchell stepped out. He didn't run from the rain. He walked through it as if it didn't dare touch him. He carried his cane, but he didn't lean on it. He wielded it like a weapon. And then the person beside him emerged. Sterling blinked, squinted. It was Sarah. But it wasn't the Sarah he knew. Gone were the oversized, stained scrubs that made her look shapeless and tired. Gone was the fearful posture of an employee trying to be invisible. Sarah was wearing a vintage olive drab field jacket over a clean set of black fatigues. The jacket was old, faded by desert suns, but the patches on the shoulder were crisp and bright. On her collar, silver oak leaves caught the lobby lights. She walked in step with the general, not behind him, but beside him. Her limp was still there, a hitch in her step, but now it didn't look like weakness, it looked like a battle scar. The automatic doors slid open. The sound of the rain outside was cut off as they stepped into the climate-controlled silence of the lobby. Mr. Henderson stepped forward, his smile plastered on like a mask. "General Mitchell, profound honor," he said. General Mitchell walked right past him, not stopping until he was 5 feet away from Dr. Sterling. The physical difference was staggering. Sterling was taller, younger, and wearing a 3000 suit. Mitchell was old, scarred, and leaning on a cane, yet he loomed over the doctor like a mountain overshadowing a pebble. "Dr. Sterling," Mitchell said, his voice low, rolling through the lobby like distant thunder. "General." Sterling nodded, trying to maintain his smirk. "I assume you're here to debrief on Commander Reynolds's condition. I'm happy to report that despite the interference we encountered, my team stabilized him." "Your team," Mitchell repeated. He turned his head slowly to look at the balcony where the entire nursing staff, including Brittany and Dr. Cole, were watching. "Is that what we're calling it?" Excuse me," Sterling faltered. Mitchell reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a tablet. He tapped the screen and held it up. It was a still image from the trauma bay security camera. It showed Sterling staring at the neck wound while Sarah's hand was on the commander's chest. "I've spent the last hour reviewing the telemetry data and the video feeds," Mitchell announced, his voice projecting to the rafters. "Commander Reynolds entered this facility with a tension pneumothorax. His trachea was deviated 3 centimeters to the left. His jugular veins were distended." The general lowered the tablet and looked Sterling in the eye. A first-year combat medic in a muddy ditch in Kandahar would have spotted that in 4 seconds. "You, the chief resident of an elite trauma center, missed it for 2 minutes. You were watching him suffocate while you played with a surface wound." The lobby was dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. Sterling's face turned a violent shade of red. That is a matter of clinical interpretation," Sterling stammered. "No," Mitchell snapped. "It is a matter of incompetence. And when this woman," he gestured to Sarah, "attempted to save the patient's life, you assaulted her."
You belittled her and you fired her.
Mitchell stepped back, giving the floor to Sarah. She looked at Sterling. She didn't look angry. She looked at him with the calm, terrifying clarity of a sniper acquiring a target. "You called me a janitor," Sarah said softly. Her voice wasn't raspy anymore, it was steel. "You bet 500 that I wouldn't last a week." Sterling swallowed hard. Sarah, look. Emotions were high. "We can discuss a severance package."
"I don't want your money,"
Sarah interrupted. "I served 20 years in the United States Army Rangers and JC. I have pulled shrapnel out of men's chests with my bare hands while taking fire. I have forgotten more about trauma medicine than you will ever learn in your country club medical school." She took a step closer. "You didn't just endanger a soldier. Doctor, you dishonored the profession. You made medicine about you, not the patient." Mr. Henderson, sensing the ship was sinking, made his move. He stepped between them, turning his back on Sterling to face the general. "General Mitchell, St. Jude's had no knowledge of Ms. Miller's distinguished background. We were missiled by D. Sterling regarding the events in the trauma bay. We take full responsibility." "Do you?" Mitchell asked dryly. "Absolutely." Henderson nodded frantically. "Da-da. Sterling's employment is terminated effective immediately. We will be reporting him to the State Medical Board for negligence." "What?" Sterling shrieked. The veneer of the golden boy cracked completely. "You can't do that. My father is Senator Sterling. I fund this wing. Your father," Mitchell said calmly, "is currently on the phone with the Secretary of Defense explaining why his son almost killed a decorated Navy SEAL commander. I don't think he's going to be much help to you today, son." 2 security guards, The very same ones Sterling had ordered to throw Sarah out hours ago, stepped forward. They looked at Henderson for the signal. Henderson nodded. They grabbed Sterling by the arms. "Get your hands off me," Sterling shouted, thrashing as they dragged him toward the revolving doors. "She's just a nurse. She's nobody. You'll regret this." His screams faded as the glass door spun, spitting him out into the cold, pouring rain without an umbrella. The silence returned to the lobby, but now it felt lighter, cleaner. About Ms. Miller, General Mitchell said, turning to Henderson. "Yes, Ms. Miller, Colonel Miller, we would be honored to have you back. Name your price. Chief of Nursing, Director of Patient Care." Sarah looked around the lobby. She saw the young nurses looking down at her with awe. She saw the residents who were terrified of making mistakes. She saw a hospital that had lost its way. "I don't want to be Chief of Nursing," Sarah said. "I want the residency program." Henderson blinked. "The teaching program. Your doctors are arrogant. They know books, but they don't know people. They don't know how to listen. I want to take over the trauma training protocols. I want to teach them that the patient is the priority, not their ego." "Done," Henderson said immediately. "Consider it done." "Good," the general grunted. "But there is one more order of business." The chime of the elevator bell rang out. Ding. Everyone turned. The doors of the main elevator slid open. A nurse was pushing a wheelchair, but the man sitting in it held up a hand. "Stop." Commander Jack Reynolds was pale. His chest was heavily bandaged beneath his hospital gown. He had tubes in his nose and an IV stand rolling beside him, but he was wearing his Navy cover, the white hat of an officer. "Sir, you shouldn't be standing," the nurse whispered.
Help me up.
Reynolds commanded. It wasn't a request. The nurse hesitated, then supported his arm. Reynolds gritted his teeth. A sheen of sweat broke out on his forehead. Every muscle in his torso screamed in protest as he forced himself to stand. His legs shook violently, but he stood. He locked eyes with Sarah across the expanse of the lobby. Sarah's composure, which had held through the confrontation with Sterling, began to crumble. "Jack," she whispered. "You stubborn fool. Sit down." "Not yet," Reynolds wheezed. His voice was weak, but it carried to every corner of the room. "They told me the janitor saved me. They told me she was fired." He took a shaky breath, steadying himself against the IV pole. "I've been in 12 combat zones," Reynolds said, addressing the room. "I've been shot, stabbed, and blown up. I know what a hero looks like, and it doesn't look like a guy in a suit." He looked at Sarah. The history between them, the shared understanding of sacrifice, of pain, of the burden of survival, passed in that look. Slowly fighting the agony in his ribs, Commander Reynolds raised his right hand. He snapped a salute. It was crisp, perfect, and held with absolute reverence. "Thank you, Dusty," he said. Sarah felt the tears hot on her cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. She snapped her heels together, ignoring the ache in her bad knee, and raised her hand to her brow. "Ooh, Commander," she choked out. For a second there was silence. Then from the balcony Dr. Cole started clapping. Then Brittany. Then the patients. Then the security guards. The applause swelled into a roar. It wasn't polite applause. It was a thunderous ovation. It washed over Sarah, cleansing the years of invisibility. It was a sound louder than the insults, louder than the doubts, louder than the demons of her past. General Mitchell stood back, tapping his cane on the floor, smiling like a proud father. Sarah Miller was home. Sarah Miller didn't just return to St. Jude's, she transformed it. Under her leadership as the director of trauma training, the hospital became the premier center for emergency medicine in the country. She taught her residents that a degree makes you a doctor, but humility makes you a healer. As for Dr. Sterling, he was last seen working at a cosmetic Botox clinic in a strip mall, checking expiration dates on saline bags with shaking hands, forever looking over his shoulder, terrified that the ghost medic might walk in for an inspection. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button. It helps us share more stories of heroes who hide in plain sight. And if you believe that karma always finds a way, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded. Never judge a book by its cover and never ever underestimate a nurse.